I stopped asking my boyfriend for anything. He only noticed when I left a note on the counter and was already gone. I scheduled my own surgery, signed my own transfer to New York, and packed every box in our apartment without saying a word to him. The morning I left, I put a note on the kitchen counter with the exact phrase he had spent 4 years using on me, and by the time he recognized it for what it was, I was already gone. Original post. My name is Chloe, and for 4 years I was the girlfriend Elias called too much. Too clingy, too needy, too present. He was a surgeon at a well-regarded hospital in Seattle, the kind of man who moved through rooms as though they had been arranged in advance for his convenience, and he had a particular talent for making a person feel that the ordinary requirements of a relationship, attention, presence, being remembered, were unreasonable requests from someone who should have learned by now to manage on their own. I had not always been that version of myself. When we met I was curious and opinionated and socially engaged, the kind of person who made plans and stuck to them and had friends who expected her to show up. Elias found this attractive for about 8 months. Then, steadily, and without announcement, my asking for things became a source of friction. My texting a photo of 2 dresses to get his opinion became an imposition. My wanting to discuss a job offer became relying on him for decisions I should handle myself. My asking what kind of specialist I needed when I had a sharp, unexplained pain in my side became, and I remember the exact words because they did not leave, "Do your own research, Chloe, you're an adult, stop relying on me for every little thing." He was not like this with everyone. That was the part one could not stop looking directly at. Lily arrived in our lives about 18 months into the relationship. She was the daughter of Elias's late mentor, a man he had loved and admired, and Elias's parents had asked him to look after her as something between a professional obligation and a personal tribute. I understood that. I genuinely did. What I watched unfold over the following months was something I could not find a name for at first, and then could not stop naming. She would text him at 3 in the morning saying her head was full of bad thoughts, and he would get up, pull on his coat, and leave. He introduced her to colleagues at the hospital personally. He drove her to appointments. He spent an entire weekend helping her rewrite a personal statement for medical school so she could secure a position at the same hospital where he worked. When I asked, once, if he could come with me to a single appointment for something I was managing, something that was making me frightened and that I did not want to navigate alone, he told me he had a complicated day and asked if I had tried an online symptom checker. When I raised the disparity, Elias had a framework ready. Lily had anxiety. Lily had bad thoughts. Lily was a risk to herself. He always stopped mid-sentence at that last part, leaving a meaningful silence, letting the implication do its work. How could I object to a man protecting someone fragile? What kind of person would I be? He was very good at constructing the terms on which I could be made to feel small. Her anxiety, I eventually noticed, had a schedule. It worsened when Elias and I had a date planned. It intensified the week I finally told him I was unhappy. It surfaced reliably, and with specific timing, whenever the attention in the room was pointed somewhere other than her. His birthday was the moment I stopped making excuses. I had worked overtime for 3 weeks to clear the calendar. I cooked a proper dinner. I had the watch he had mentioned once in passing, the one that cost more than I should have spent, ready on the counter beside his plate. I waited until midnight. He did not come home. I found out where he was from an Instagram story Lily had posted: London, a conference, a table at a restaurant, his coat visible at the edge of the frame. That coat was a Burberry I had given him for our 3rd anniversary. He called when he saw my messages. He told me it was a career opportunity and birthdays happened every year, and that I needed to stop tracking his schedule and get my own life in order. When I broke down on the phone and asked him whether I was always last in his world, always the one who could be postponed, the one whose slot in the calendar filled up first when something else appeared, he told me I was being irrational and that we would talk when he got back to Seattle. Then he hung up. I sat in the apartment for a long time that night. Then I opened a spreadsheet, because I am a person who processes things by organizing them, and I started a list. Update 1. The shift was not dramatic and it was not performed. It simply happened, the way change happens when a person stops waiting for conditions to improve and starts adjusting to conditions as they exist. I found a specialist for the thing that had been bothering me and booked an appointment without mentioning it to Elias. When the specialist recommended a minor procedure and an overnight hospital stay, I handled the insurance pre-approval and the scheduling without asking anyone's opinion. When an email arrived from work about a position opening at the New York headquarters, I filled out the application and hit send before I had thought through whether I intended to take it. When Sarah's wedding invitation arrived, I RSVP'd for one. Elias noticed I had stopped asking him things. His response was to become watchful. Not to ask what was wrong, not to change his behavior, but to watch me with the slightly unsteady attention of someone who has noticed the environment has shifted and cannot yet identify where. One Thursday, I ran into him at the hospital. He had been at a conference and came straight from the airport, pulling a suitcase down the corridor. Lily was beside him in her scrubs and, over them, the Burberry coat. I was walking out with my paperwork from the surgical consult. He saw me and frowned. "What are you doing here?" Sick again. The word again. As though illness were something I manufactured for inconvenience. He took the papers from my hand without asking and scanned them with the expression he used for administrative tasks that were beneath his full attention. He said he had things scheduled for the next day and this was not an emergency, and that we could do it when he had time. I said I had already handled it. He stared at me. The disconnect between what he remembered, the woman who called him in tears over minor ailments, who sent him a dozen selfies before a date to get his opinion on the dress, who needed his input on salad dressing, and what was standing in front of him was visible on his face. A person who had scheduled their own surgery and was now calmly taking the paperwork back from his hand. I reached past him for the clipboard. He dropped something when he stepped aside. A small box, which hit the floor and scattered its contents. Birth control pills. He said, flatly, that they were for Lily, doctor's orders, and that it wasn't what I was thinking. Lily pulled the coat tighter around herself and began explaining about her anxiety, her sleeplessness, her bad thoughts, her gratitude that Elias understood her in a way no one else did, and how she wished she could be strong like me. I had heard this script before, delivered in this order, at this type of moment. I told Elias he should take good care of her. After all, her mental health was clearly more pressing than my surgery. I walked out. Update 2. I came home that evening to find my guest room occupied. The sheets I had bought specifically for Sarah's visit were balled on the floor. A large stuffed animal was spread across the bed. Skin care products and pill bottles covered the vanity. A silk pajama top I had bought as a birthday gift for myself, tags still attached, was draped over the chair with a coffee stain across the front. The front door opened while I was standing there. Lily's voice drifted in ahead of her, warm and light, thanking Elias for dinner, describing the pasta, the tiramisu, the improvement to her mood. Then she saw me. Elias explained. Lily's roommate situation had deteriorated. Her emotions were affected. He had been concerned about leaving her alone and had arranged for her to use the guest room temporarily. He said it in the tone he used when explaining something reasonable to someone who would need a moment to arrive at reason themselves. I told him I had texted him a week earlier that Sarah was coming to stay. He had responded that I could handle it without consulting him. He had completely forgotten the content while remembering his own advice. He apologized. He held up a takeout bag and mentioned the Italian restaurant, the one I had asked him to take me to for months while he said he was too busy. He said he would take me that weekend. I took the bag and dropped it in the trash. Lily moved toward me immediately, launching into the anxiety and the nightmares and the shaking and the bad place she was in, offering to share whatever room was available once my friend arrived, telling me she did not want to be any trouble. I listened until she finished. Then I gathered the bald sheets, the stuffed animal, and the coffee-stained top, carried them into the hallway, and deposited them outside the apartment door. I went back to the kitchen and told Lily she could share with Elias. She did not have to be in the guest room on my account. She burst into tears and left. Elias stayed. He stood in the kitchen with the expression of a man deciding whether to address the fire or the person who lit it, and then said that I could have simply asked her to leave if I did not want her there, that I had not needed to attack her, that she was not stable and he would have gotten her a hotel. I said this was our apartment, and asked whether it had occurred to him to ask me before inviting someone to live in it. He said she was in a mental health crisis and asked if that was really my first consideration. He said it was not as though I had consulted him about Sarah's visit. He said it was a temporary arrangement and not everything required discussion. I told him he was right. Not everything required discussion. Fair is fair, I said. Which meant, as I thought about it standing there in our kitchen, that moving to New York and ending this relationship probably did not require one either. Update 3. Sarah arrived at 9 the next morning with pastries and the particular composed expression of someone who has already assessed the situation from the outside and is waiting for her to be ready. She did not comment on what was missing from the apartment or what had changed in the past 24 hours. She poured coffee and sat at the island and let me eat in silence until I was ready. When I was ready, I told her about the guest room and the sheets and the coat. She said she knew about the text and the coat. She asked what I needed from her that day. I told her I needed her to come to the hospital and bring the terrible magazines she liked. She had 3 in her bag. The surgery took 2 hours. Sarah was there when I came around from the anesthesia, there when the post-surgical disorientation made everything thick and muffled, there when I needed water and when I was coherent enough to be irritated by the hospital gown. She had the magazines. We watched 40 minutes of something forgettable on her laptop and she let me use her shoulder without making it significant. At 3:47 in the afternoon, Elias appeared in the doorway. He stood there and took in the room. Sarah in the chair beside the bed, the magazine open on the blanket, the empty water cup she had already refilled twice, me in the hospital gown looking at him with the anesthesia still making everything slightly slow. He sat down when Sarah stood up to give him the chair. He asked about the procedure and the recovery timeline, which were the questions he was trained to ask because they had correct and documentable answers. When Sarah came back with tea from the vending machine, Elias stood and said he should get back. Lily had had a rough afternoon. Sarah looked at him without expression. I told him it was fine. It was handled. He recognized the phrase. I watched it register. He stayed another few minutes, making the careful conversation of a man who knows he has arrived too late and is deciding how to account for it, and then he left. Sarah turned a page of her magazine without looking up. Whenever you're ready to talk about New York, she said, I'm here. Thursday, I said. I'll help you pack. Update 4. The last 11 days in the apartment had a quality I had not expected. Quiet, not peaceful, but the quiet that follows a decision when the uncertainty stops and what remains is logistics. Elias noticed. He watched me with the focused attention he had not given me in months, the attention that surfaces when something familiar has changed and cannot be located. I did not volunteer the location. I stopped texting him about small things. I did not mention the prescription I collected or the work call that ran until 7 or the documentary I watched 2 nights running. I stopped leaving him the last of the coffee. When he came home I said hello and went back to what I was doing. Lily called him twice during a dinner we ate together. He went to the balcony for the first call and the hallway for the second. When he came back he was watching me for a reaction. There was not one. He seemed more unsettled by the absence of reaction than the reaction itself would have produced. On the 9th evening, he sat on the edge of the bed while I packed a box of books. You seem different, he said. I kept packing. I placed a book in the box. You used to tell me things. What happened at work? A show you wanted to watch. I said, you used to put your headphones in. He went quiet. I told him I was not saying it as an accusation. I meant it without bitterness, simply as a fact about what we had each been doing. Then I told him I was tired and I was going to sleep. He did not push it. That restraint, which I had once read as respect for my autonomy, landed as its own kind of answer about what we had become. On the morning of the 12th day I got up before him. I made coffee. I finished packing the last 2 boxes, a candle I liked, a notebook, the mug with the chipped handle that had been my mother's. I moved quietly, the way you do when someone is still sleeping and you have decided not to make the leaving into an event. The car service arrived at 8. I left a note on the kitchen counter. 5 words. I handled it. Don't worry. Update 5. New York in November was cold in the way of a city built entirely from concrete and intention. I loved it quickly, which I had not anticipated. The displacement was real, and the loneliness was real, and the vast reorganization of starting a life somewhere unfamiliar was real. But underneath all of it, something I had not felt in a long time, the simple, grounded experience of being somewhere that did not require me to make myself smaller to fit. I was 3 weeks into the new office when I met Adrian Hall. He was there for a consulting review that had nothing to do with my department. He was the kind of man who had stopped performing things and now simply did them, settled, unhurried, wearing his suit as though it were a mild inconvenience he had learned to tolerate. When he looked at you, he was actually looking. In the meeting, 40 minutes in, he noticed I was pressing my hand against my left side. The incision from the surgery, still protesting sustained sitting. A small, involuntary gesture, the kind that surfaces when you are no longer concentrating on hiding it. At the break, he set a bottle of water on the desk in front of me and said nothing. I looked at the water. You're favoring your left side, he said. You don't have to explain. I thought you might need it. I had been about to say I was fine. I had been about to say I had handled it. Neither felt right. I said thank you, and he went back to his notebook. 3 weeks later, we were both working late. The floor emptied out around us, the office going quiet, and I went to the break room and came back with 2 cups of coffee, muscle memory, the arithmetic of 2 people, the ghost of a life that no longer existed. I stood for a moment with both cups. Then I set one on the table beside him. He looked up, then at the cup, then back at his work. Thank you, he said, and drank it. No comment on the gesture. No reading into it. We worked in silence for another hour, and somewhere in that hour I realized the silence was genuinely comfortable, not tolerated, not negotiated, and that it had been a long time since I had been in a room with someone and not been performing anything. He began remembering things without being told. My coffee order, mentioned once in passing during a group meeting. That I did not eat lunch when I was close to a deadline. That I arrived early and like the first hour before anyone else got in. He left food on my desk sometimes, a container from the Thai place around the corner, a sandwich on a day I had clearly forgotten to eat, without notes, without announcing it, without any suggestion that it required acknowledgement. The first time, I said automatically, you didn't have to do that. He looked at me steadily. I know you can handle it. That is not why I did it. I asked why. Because you are 3 weeks into a new city, he said, and you had a recent surgery, and you work until 7 most nights. Because being capable of managing everything alone does not mean it should always be the expectation. He looked back at his work. Capability is not the same thing as preference. I stood there for a moment. Okay, I said. Okay, he agreed. He walked me to the subway 3 times before I registered it as intentional. The 4th time I told him he did not live in that direction. He said it was 12 minutes out of his way and asked if that was a problem. I said I knew he did not do it because I needed him to. He said he was not doing it because I needed him to. There it was again. That precision. Present because he chose to be, not because I had earned the right to ask. No negotiation required, no performance of need, no price attached to the gesture. I told him he could just say he liked talking to me. The corner of his mouth moved. He pressed the crosswalk button. I could, he said. I do. Update 6. Elias called in February. His name appeared on my phone and I felt something I had not expected, not the old ache, not the complicated grief of something unresolved, but something closer to recognition. The name of a city where I had lived once and no longer needed to return to. I answered because I had decided somewhere in the previous months that I was no longer afraid of the conversation. He was in New York for a conference. He asked if we could get coffee. He was already at the table when I arrived. He stood when he saw me, and looked at me the way people look at something that has changed more than they had prepared for. I was wearing a coat I had bought in January, deep green, chosen because I liked it, tried on without texting a photograph to anyone. My hair was shorter, cut in December because I had wanted to cut it. I had slept well. I felt, in the most straightforward sense, like myself. He said I looked good. I said different might be the more accurate word. He wrapped his hands around his cup and told me he had been thinking since I left about the things he had said to me. That I needed to be more independent. That I relied on him too much. He said he had watched me actually become those things, manage the surgery, handle the move, build an entirely different life, and had realized somewhere in the watching that he had spent years teaching me to stop needing him, and had then been bewildered and unsettled when I did. I told him he had not been lying when he said those things to me. That was the part that had taken me longest to metabolize. He had genuinely believed I was too much. The problem had not been dishonesty. It was that he had meant every word of it, up until the moment the absence made it impossible to maintain. He asked why I had not fought harder for us. I looked at him across the table. I told him I had fought for us so long that I had forgotten to fight for myself, and that once I remembered, there was not much left of us to defend. He said he had ended things with Lily. The mentorship, the relationship in whatever form it had been, all of it. He said he had finally seen the pattern. Something moved across his face when he said it, something that might have been relief and cost him something to admit. I said I was glad for that. He asked whether there was someone else. I thought about the subway and the 12-minute detour and the container of Thai food that appeared on my desk without ceremony and the hour of mutual silence that felt like breathing space rather than absence. I told him that was not the right question. The right question was whether I was okay, and I was. We finished our coffees. On the sidewalk, he stood in the cold for a moment and said he missed me. I told him I knew, and that the feeling would go somewhere useful eventually, and that he should let it. Then I walked toward the subway without looking back. Not as a gesture, not for his benefit, simply because there was nothing in that direction I needed to see anymore. That evening Adrian and I had dinner. Not a formal occasion, we had fallen into Thursday dinners the way people fall into things that fit without requiring negotiation, and it had become a standing arrangement neither of us had explicitly proposed. He was already at the restaurant when I arrived. He stood when I came in, pulled out my chair, and I had stopped flinching at being on the receiving end of consideration that came without conditions. He asked about my day. I told him Elias had come to New York. He was quiet for a moment. How was it? Finished, I said. In the correct sense, like closing a window that had been left open. He asked if I was okay. I told him I thought I was actually, genuinely okay, that the word had meant something different in Seattle, where it was shorthand for I am managing, and that here it had started meaning something closer to what it was supposed to mean. He smiled, the real version, the one that started in his eyes before his face confirmed it. Good, he said. He reached for his menu. The fish is supposed to be good tonight, if you want a suggestion. I always want a suggestion, I said. I know. We ordered. The restaurant was warm. The conversation went where it always went when it was the two of us, effortlessly, with room for silence that neither of us felt the need to fill. At some point I looked at him across the table and understood, without requiring it to be said, that this was what it felt like when someone chose you without the choosing being a sacrifice. Months later, on a Sunday in May, we were walking back from the farmer's market. He was carrying the heavier bag, having taken it without announcement, and a block from my apartment I said the thing he had told me early on, about helping me not because I could not manage but because I should not always have to. He said he remembered. I told him I had spent 4 years believing that needing things was the problem. That if I could want less and ask less and take up less space, the relationship would finally fit correctly. I said I had nearly sent him a photo of my surgical consent form from the prep room and then put my phone down. He said he knew I did not need it. He said that was not why he would have wanted it. I know, I said. That is the part that changed things. He slowed his pace and I slowed with him, and on the quiet Sunday street with the market bag between us he looked at me with the direct, steady attention I had learned to stop bracing against. Chloe, he said. I chose you, not because you asked. Not because you performed the right version of yourself or earned it incrementally, because I wanted to. He paused. I just wanted you to know that. I looked at him for a moment. I do know, I said. That is actually the thing. I know it. He held out his hand. I took it. He had taught me that needing things made me too much. I unlearned it in a city where no one knew who I had been. And by the time Elias understood I had stopped asking, I had already stopped waiting. Edit, for everyone asking whether Elias ever truly loved me, I think he did, in the capacity he had for it at that time. The problem was not that his love was false, it was that his love had a ceiling, and the ceiling was at exactly the height where I would have had to compress myself to fit under it. That is not a sustainable architecture for a person. Edit 2, for the people asking about Lily. I have no particular feelings about Lily anymore, which is its own kind of answer. She existed in a dynamic that Elias had allowed and maintained, and the mechanisms she used were ones he had given her access to by establishing the terms. I do not know what her life looks like now. I hope she found someone actually suited to providing what she needed. I hope they were not also someone else's partner at the time. Edit 3, for the people asking what the note said. 5 words. I handled it. Don't worry. They were his words originally, the phrase he had used when deflecting my calls for attention for years, when telling me my needs were manageable without him. Leaving them on the counter on the way out was not calculated. It was simply what came to me, and it was accurate, and I thought he deserved to recognize them. Edit 4, for the people asking whether I would go back to Elias if he had changed genuinely and completely. The honest answer is that the question does not arise. The version of Elias who appeared at the coffee shop in February was a man who had been changed by losing something, which is different from a man who changed because he understood what was right. Both can produce the same result in a person. Only one of them is trustworthy as a foundation. I know which one I was looking at across the table, and I know which one was waiting at the restaurant on Thursday evening when I got back from the subway.